My name is Nathan Cole. I'm 34 years old, and I used to be a captain in the United States Army. I served 10 years, did multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, and earned a Medal of Honor after leading a mission that saved 11 hostages and cost me 3 of my closest friends. I came home thinking I had done something good, that I had made it back in one piece, that maybe, just maybe, I could start over. I was wrong. I walked into a world I no longer recognized, and a life that had quietly fallen apart behind my back. The house was still there, my name still on the mailbox, but nothing inside belonged to me anymore. She was already gone before I even stepped off the base. My wife Emily had moved on while I was overseas. I learned that from the divorce papers waiting on the kitchen counter next to a half-finished glass of wine and a signed retainer from a lawyer named Greg, who also happened to be the man she was now sleeping with. I stood there in uniform, dust still clinging to my boots, and realized the battle I'd survived wasn't the one that broke me. The divorce was fast, brutal, and carefully orchestrated. I barely had time to catch my breath before I was buried under a mountain of legal motions. She had prepared everything while I was still deployed. She filed claims that I was unstable, mentally unfit to parent because of PTSD. There were character witnesses, lined up all cherry-picked from her family and social circle. It was a script, and I never saw it coming. We had 2 sons, Caleb and Evan, 10 and 8. I used to carry pictures of them inside my helmet right above my brow so I could see their faces every time I looked down. Those boys were my reason for staying alive during firefights, and now I couldn't even get a weekend visit. The court said my presence could be emotionally damaging. I was deemed a risk, a Medal of Honor recipient. A risk. They took the house. They took my truck. They emptied our joint accounts within days. I was assigned a public defender who barely looked at me and never once returned a call. I moved into a rundown motel on the edge of town where the lights flickered and the air smelled like mold. That lasted 3 nights until I couldn't afford it anymore. After that, I lived in my truck. You don't realize how loud the world is until you're trying to sleep in a Walmart parking lot at 3 a.m. praying a security guard doesn't knock on your window. I used to lead combat patrols through bomb-ridden valleys, and now I was brushing my teeth in gas station bathrooms. I told myself it was temporary, that I just needed time, that I'd bounce back. But time didn't bring back my boys. It didn't fix the system that chewed me up and spit me out. People look at you differently when you're no longer useful. I wore a uniform for a decade, gave everything I had, and once that uniform came off, I was invisible. To some, I was just another angry vet with a chip on his shoulder. To others, I was a story they'd rather not hear. I tried applying for job security construction, anything, but no one wanted a guy with a lawsuit for custody and a mental health red flag on his record. And the worst part, I started to believe what they said about me. That maybe I was broken. Maybe Emily was right to take the kids. That maybe the man who came home wasn't the same one who left. I kept replaying everything in my head, wondering how I didn't see it coming. How the person I loved most had weaponized my own sacrifices against me. I'd sit for hours staring at old photos on my phone. Birthdays. Barbecues. Those silly bedtime selfies where my boys would pile on top of me like I was a jungle gym. I didn't cry. Not once. I couldn't afford to. If I let go, I didn't know if I'd be able to put myself back together. I held on to one thing: routine. Wake up before dawn. Work the overnight shift at the gas station. Save every dollar. Keep my head down. I told myself that if I stayed quiet, maybe karma would find its way back around. Maybe someone would see me. Maybe someone would care. Turns out someone did. Just not in the way I expected. The truck wasn't meant to be a home. But for a long while, it was the only roof I had left. I parked it behind an old hardware store on the edge of town, tucked between dumpsters and a broken fence just out of sight. The back seat was too small for a man my size, but after enough nights I learned how to curl myself around the wheel jacket over my face to block the streetlights. I never imagined that after all I'd survived overseas, it would be paperwork, lawyers, and a courtroom that brought me to my knees. I used to command soldiers, run complex missions, and make life or death decisions in seconds. Now I was a security guard working minimum wage at a gas station that smelled like burnt coffee and tire cleaner. 12-hour shifts, most of them in silence, broken only by the occasional drunk yelling for cigarettes or someone asking if we still had lottery tickets. They called me sir sometimes, not out of respect, but confusion, like they couldn't figure out why a man with the posture of a soldier was checking shelves for expired milk at 2 a.m. I didn't tell them. What was the point? No one wants to hear how far you've fallen. They just want their gas and their change. I kept a small photo of Caleb and Evan wedged inside the visor above my head. It was faded edges curled from a trip we took to Yosemite. Their faces frozen mid-laugh, arms wrapped around my neck. I looked at that photo every night before trying to sleep, whispering things I didn't dare to say out loud. I missed their voices most. The way they used to fight over whose turn it was to ride on my shoulders. The sound of them calling me dad like it was the most natural thing in the world. My paychecks barely covered food and gas. I couldn't afford a new lawyer, and the state wouldn't give me another. I tried calling Emily to ask if I could see the boys. She never picked up. Eventually, I stopped trying. I didn't want them to grow up resenting me for the version of me she probably painted. I figured it was better they remember the dad from the camping trips, not the one sleeping in a parking lot with dirty clothes and a stitched-up uniform. I tried the V a few times. Signed up for support groups. Walked into a room filled with other men like me, each carrying ghosts of their own. But when it came time to speak, I froze. What was I supposed to say? That I'd done everything right, followed every order, and still ended up with nothing, that the country I bled for turned its back on me the moment I stopped being useful. I left without saying a word. Some nights were worse than others. On the coldest ones, I'd leave the truck running just long enough to get the heat going, then shut it off and hope I'd drift off before it got too cold again. I stopped counting the nights after 47. Sleep came in bursts, dreams full of static and sand and sirens. I woke up more tired than when I went to bed. People think homelessness looks like cardboard signs and ragged jackets. But sometimes it wears a uniform and drives a truck that still smells like kids' snacks. I still had my military ID, still had the medal stored in a shoebox under the seat. But those things didn't matter anymore. Not when you're invisible. One night a woman came into the station, recognized me from a local news story from years ago. Said she remembered my face. I smiled, lied, and told her she had the wrong guy. I didn't want pity. I didn't want anyone to know just how far I'd sunk. I just wanted a sliver of my old life back, a phone call from my son, a hot shower without a time limit, a day without having to explain myself. I started keeping a notebook. Nothing fancy, just something I found in the clearance bin. I'd write down memories I was scared of losing. Caleb's first steps. The time Evan broke his arm trying to fly off the porch like Superman. The way Emily used to make pancakes on Sundays before everything turned sour. I wrote them down like proof I once existed. Like maybe if I lost everything else, I'd still have that. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Some days I thought maybe God would send me a sign. Other days I wasn't sure he even remembered me. But I kept waking up, kept showing up to work, kept holding on to the idea that life couldn't stay this dark forever. And then one night it happened. A moment I never saw coming. A stranger. A gasp. A decision that would change everything. It was just past 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of hour where even the highway forgets to breathe. The gas station was quiet, fluorescent lights humming overhead, casting long shadows against the floor. I was restocking the mini-fridge when a customer stumbled in and mumbled something about the restroom key. 10 minutes passed, then 15. I knocked on the door, no answer. I called out, still nothing. Something didn't sit right. I grabbed the spare key, opened the door, and there he was. An old man, maybe in his 80s, collapsed on the tile, one hand clutching his chest. His skin looked pale, waxy, like someone had drained all the color from his body. I dropped to my knees, called 911, and tried to keep him awake. I remembered enough from combat training to check his pulse, tilt his head, and make sure he was breathing. His eyes fluttered open just barely, then locked onto mine. I kept talking to him, trying to ground him, telling him help was on the way. He didn't say much, just looked at me like I was a ghost from another life. Then out of nowhere, he gripped my wrist tighter than I thought a man his age could. His lips moved slowly, as if the words were buried beneath years of silence. "You look like someone I once loved." He said it twice, eyes wide, like he was seeing a memory instead of my face. I didn't know what to say. My heart beat faster than it had in years, but not from fear. From something else. Something deeper. I nodded, told him to stay with me, and told him he was going to be okay. But I could see in his face that he didn't believe it. The sirens started to get louder, but he never let go of my hand. He whispered those words again, just barely loud enough to hear. And then his eyes closed. The MTs arrived seconds later, pushing me aside, asking questions I didn't have answers to. I stood there covered in cold sweat, my ears ringing. I couldn't stop thinking about what he said. Not the panic, not the way he collapsed. Just that one sentence. "You look like someone I once loved." And for reasons I couldn't explain, it wouldn't leave me alone. A week after the incident, I got a call from a law office I'd never heard of. At first, I thought it was a scam. Why would a lawyer want to speak to me? I hadn't been in a courtroom since my life fell apart. But curiosity got the better of me, and I showed up to the appointment in the only clean shirt I had left. The office was on the top floor of a building I couldn't afford to walk past, let alone walk into. Everything smelled like old money and polished wood. The man behind the desk introduced himself as Richard Bellamy and slid a thick envelope across the table. Then he told me the name of the man I'd tried to save. Edward Langston. I froze. He said Langston had passed away 3 days after that night. Heart failure. But before he died, he changed his will. I didn't understand at first. Thought maybe he left me a note or some token. But then Richard leaned forward and said it outright. Edward Langston left everything to you. The house, the investments, the company shares. All of it. I laughed. It wasn't the good kind of laugh. It was hollow, confused, disbelieving. I asked why. Why would a stranger do that? That's when Richard opened a drawer and pulled out a black and white photograph. It was my mother, young, smiling, holding a baby in her arms. Holding me. Turns out Edward Langston wasn't a stranger. He was my grandfather. He'd fallen in love with my mother's mom, a black woman from Georgia. His family disowned him for it, calling the relationship a disgrace. He'd lost touch with my mother when she was still young. But he never stopped looking. And the night I held his hand, he knew. Somehow he knew. I sat there in silence while Richard read the note Edward left behind. It said, "You're the only one in this family who has earned what I've built. You didn't come asking for anything. You came to save a life. That makes you mine." I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight in a different way than it had in months. Not from pain, but from something that felt like forgiveness. Or maybe belonging. I walked out of that office, not richer but different. Everything had changed. And yet, I still didn't know just how much. The first thing I did wasn't buy a car or move into a mansion. It was hiring the sharpest attorney I could find. Her name was Michael Garvey. She specialized in family law and civil fraud, and when I told her everything that had happened, she didn't blink. She said we'd need to move fast, dig deep, and be ready for a fight. Michelle brought in a private investigator, a retired FBI agent who now dealt with white-collar crimes. They went through court documents, subpoenaed phone records, pulled financial logs, and traced digital footprints. It didn't take long to find the cracks. Emails between my ex-wife and her attorney timestamped months before I returned home. Wire transfers that shouldn't have existed. A secret account under her father's name where most of our marital assets had quietly disappeared. The more we uncovered, the more I realized how planned it all had been. This wasn't a divorce. It was a hijacking. They painted me as unstable, dangerous, too broken to raise children. They never mentioned the medals, the therapy I attended regularly, the years I spent writing letters to my sons from overseas. None of that made it into the courtroom. Michelle filed a motion to reopen the case, backed by our new evidence. It made the local news first, then national. Suddenly my name was back in headlines, but this time not for valor in combat. This time for what had been stolen from me. Reporters called, podcasts reached out. Everyone wanted to know how a war hero ended up living in a truck because of a rigged divorce. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to humiliate anyone. I just wanted the truth out there. I wanted my sons to know that their father never gave up on them. That everything I'd done I did to protect them, even when I wasn't allowed to see them. The pressure worked. A judge agreed to reopen the case. Depositions followed. My ex-wife was caught lying under oath. Her father tried to deny involvement until bank records proved otherwise. The court ruled that the previous decision had been tainted by fraud and misconduct. Custody was reviewed from scratch. At the same time, the military reached out. Someone in the Pentagon saw my story and started asking questions. They offered to reinstate my records fully and invited me to consult on a new program for soldiers dealing with PTSD. I didn't hesitate. If I could keep even one soldier from falling through the cracks like I had, it would be worth it. I moved into a modest home just outside the city. Nothing fancy. Just space, sunlight, and a room each for Caleb and Evan. I painted the walls myself, put together their beds, and stocked the fridge with everything they used to love. I didn't tell them until it was all ready. When the judge finally awarded me shared custody, I waited outside their school like it was the first day of my life. They were taller. Their voices are deeper. But when they saw me, they ran like they used to, arms wide. No hesitation. I dropped to my knees and held them both like I never wanted to let go again. The media attention faded eventually, as it always does. But the scars stayed. Not as reminders of pain, but proof of survival. I used some of the inheritance to start a small foundation for veterans fighting custody battles. I named it after the call sign of my old unit. It was my way of saying no one gets left behind, not on the battlefield and not in a courtroom. Some people said I was lucky, that I stumbled into fortune. But luck doesn't carry you through war. It doesn't survive nights in a freezing truck. it doesn't get your kids back. That took grit. That took faith. That took getting up every single day, even when I had nothing to stand on but memory. And now I have more than I ever dreamed. Not money. Not headlines. I have my name back. My dignity. My sons. And no one's ever taking them from me again. The first few nights with Caleb and Evan felt like trying to remember a song I used to know by heart. They were quiet, at first careful. I didn't push. We built new routines, small ones. Cooking breakfast together, shooting hoops in the driveway, and evening walks with no destination. Slowly, their laughter came back. And when it did, it cracked something open in me that I didn't even know was still closed. I took them to the cemetery on a cool Sunday morning. It was quiet, the air still, the kind that makes you talk softer without realizing it. We stood at the grave of Edward Langston. I told them about the man I barely knew, but somehow owed everything to. I told them about the night he looked into my eyes and saw someone worth saving, and how without that moment we might never have found each other again. They didn't ask a lot of questions, but they listened. Caleb reached for my hand. Evan just nodded and said he was glad we came. We left a folded flag on the grave and a drawing Evan made of our family. That moment under the wide sky felt like something permanent, like a wound beginning to close. Back home, we started filling the walls with memories, pictures from the past and new ones too. I caught them calling me Dad again, not like a stranger, but like it had never stopped. And each time it hit me harder than the last. All the courtrooms, the nights alone, the ache in my chest, it all felt worth it. Just for that word. I didn't care about the money anymore. I didn't care about the press or the people who suddenly wanted to be part of my story. What mattered was the two boys asleep down the hall. What mattered was showing up for them every day, no matter how tired or scared or uncertain I felt. That's what being a father means. Not perfection, just presence. We planted a small tree in the backyard. Evan named it Hope. Caleb said it would be taller than the house one day. I told them I believed it. And I did. Some nights I still wake up before dawn, half expecting the cold leather of a truck seat beneath me. Then I hear footsteps in the hallway, a door creak, someone whispering about cereal, and I remember where I am. I remember what I fought for, what I almost lost, what I'll never take for granted again. I used to think I needed to fight for recognition, for redemption, for some version of justice the world refused to give me. But now I know the only thing I ever really wanted was this. A chance to be their dad. A chance to be enough. And sometimes when the house is quiet and I watch them sleeping, I wonder how many other fathers out there are still fighting their own invisible war, waiting for one small break to change everything. I wonder how many of them just need someone to believe they're still worth saving.